They say some stories are too impossible to be true, until you realize they actually happened. Imagine standing at the edge of a roaring sea, with death chasing you from behind, and suddenly the ocean tears open before your eyes. Not in a dream, not in a movie, in real life. This isn't mythology. This is a moment that shattered nature, silenced armies, and proved that when faith walks forward, even the sea knows how to move. This isn't a myth. The splitting of the sea. Wait a minute. You're telling me this actually happened, like for real. This isn't just some symbolic story passed down for inspiration. A prophet stood before a sea, an army thundering behind him, his people panicking, trapped between death and the deep. And the ocean split open. That's wild. Think about it, millions of people cornered at the edge of the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army, the most powerful military force of that time, was closing in fast. And then what happens? The man calm, composed, holds out his staff, trusting in a higher command, and the sea opens up. Not metaphorically, literally, walls of water standing tall on both sides, a dry path stretching through the sea, people walking through terrified, amazed, silent, hearing nothing but the wind and their own breath. That image is burned into human history. You know, when we hear these stories, we often think, okay, cool, ancient tale, probably exaggerated. But here's what flips the script. This event isn't just in one tradition. It's confirmed in multiple ancient scriptures across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Not just storytelling, historical continuity. And it wasn't just a miracle for the sake of amazement. It was a sign. A message that when you're doing what's right, when you're standing on truth, the impossible can break open right in front of you. This wasn't a magician's trick. This was power beyond physics, a moment where natural law bowed to divine command. The kind of thing that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about how the universe works, and imagine the moment after. The people cross safely. Then Pharaoh and his army follow in confident, arrogant, thinking they'll crush the weak. And just as they're in the middle, the sea collapses, not a wave, the entire sea crashes in on them. Power, pride, empire swallowed, gone. That's not just history, that's a lesson, that oppression always comes to an end. That truth, no matter how cornered it seems, finds a way through. And here's the thing, the prophet didn't panic. He didn't run, he didn't fight back. He stood, trusted, and acted. In our world today, that feels rare. We live in a time where people doubt everything, where facts are buried under noise. But sometimes the most unbelievable truths are the ones that hit your gut the hardest. So when you hear about a man splitting the sea, don't shrug it off. Ask yourself, what kind of power stands behind someone with that much trust? And maybe, just maybe, we're the ones who forgot what real miracles look like. This wasn't a myth. This was a moment that changed history. Wait, hold on. You're telling me that actually happened. You're saying this wasn't just some legend or poetic metaphor passed down to teach us a lesson. This wasn't a fictional story cooked up around a fire to give people hope. A man stood before a body of water, a sea, and it literally split in half. That's the kind of thing you hear and go, no way, that's too much. But here's the thing, it's not just mentioned once in some obscure scroll. It's been echoed in religious texts for thousands of years. It's woven into the spiritual DNA of billions. Something about it just refuses to be forgotten. It's not like people just let this one fade away like other myths or legends. No, this one stuck around, this one keeps resurfacing. Why? Imagine the situation for a second. You've got an entire nation of people, men, women, children, running for their lives. They've been enslaved for generations. They've finally broken free, but now they're stuck. There's no bridge, no boat, no tunnel, just water, and behind them, the most powerful military force on the planet, furious, riding hard, closing in fast. What do you even do in a moment like that? Most people panic, most people collapse, but this man, he doesn't flinch. He turns toward the water, not away from it, not to escape. He moves toward what looks like the end. And then, it happens, he raises his staff, not with arrogance, not with some over-the-top drama, with quiet, divine certainty, and the sea parts, like parts, opens up, left and right, massive walls of water rise up and hold. Still, balanced, obedient, and right through the middle, dry land, a path, an escape not just for him, but for everyone, for the tired, the terrified, the trembling, they actually walk through a sea. Not on rafts, not on logs, on foot, on ground where there should have been drowning, on a miracle. Now pause. Let that sink in. This isn't just a cool special effect in a movie. This was witnessed by thousands, maybe millions. This was a moment when nature itself bent, when the laws we think are so fixed shifted. Something bigger was at work, something beyond control, beyond science, beyond explanation, and that should make you think. Not just about history, about now, about how quickly we dismiss what we can't immediately explain, how fast we file away the impossible as just a story, but what if it wasn't? What if we've become too numb to wonder? What if miracles didn't stop? What if we just stopped seeing them? This wasn't just some guy getting lucky. This was a divine command being answered. A man aligned so deeply with truth that even the sea responded to his call. And that's the part that hits hardest, because he didn't raise an army, he didn't fire a weapon. He stood there, calm, grounded in trust, in full belief that the one who brought him to this point wasn't about to abandon him now. That level of faith, that unshakable confidence, it's not blind, it's earned, it's built over time, over pain, over trial, over surrender, and then once the people passed through safely, what happened next was even more intense. The very force that opened to save them closed in to destroy their pursuers. The oppressors didn't just get delayed, they got erased. That whole army that thought they were untouchable, they were swallowed. Gone, in the same waters they thought they could dominate. It's as if the sea itself made a decision, as if the universe was saying, enough, you know what's really mind, bending the way people still try to explain it away. Like somehow, in the middle of a heist, Dake's moment with lives hanging in the balance, there just happened to be a sudden shift in wind patterns, or a freak low tide. As if that's enough to account for an entire sea parting in two perfect walls and staying open long enough for thousands of people to walk through. Dry, not muddy, not knee-deep in water, dry. It's wild how we'll accept 1,000 other unbelievable things in science fiction or fantasy movies, but when it comes to real historical events that shook the earth, we flinch, we second-guess, we reduce it down to maybe it was just symbolic. But that's the thing, this wasn't just symbolic. It was strategic, it was surgical, a precise intervention at the exact moment it was needed, not too early, not too late. Just as Pharaoh's army was pressing in, just when fear was reaching its peak, that's when it happened. That's when divine timing kicked in, because if the sea had opened too early, maybe the people would have hesitated, maybe doubt would have crept in. But when there's no time left to think, when you're forced to choose between faith or fear, that's when the miracle hits hardest. Because it's not about comfort, it's about trust. It's about surrendering control right at the edge of collapse. And here's something we often miss. The prophet wasn't just leading with strength. He was carrying the weight of everyone else's panic. He was standing in front of a terrified crowd, people crying out, questioning, accusing, and yet he didn't let their fear become his fear. That takes a different kind of leadership, that takes spiritual backbone. Because it's easy to look composed when everything's working out. But when you're standing between a charging army and a wall of water, and you still don't flinch, that's not just leadership, that's alignment. That's knowing you've been called, and the one who called you didn't bring you here to let you drown. The courage wasn't in the staff, it wasn't in the miracle, it was in the moment before, that silent second before the sea split. That's where the real power was. The stillness before the storm answered, that deep internal voice that says, take the step, it's already done. Because most people don't wait for the sea to open before they move. Most people wait for the path to be visible. But he raised his hand before anything changed. He moved before the evidence showed up. That's what made the sea split. Not magic, not performance, but faith that moved first. And the people behind him, they didn't have that kind of clarity. They didn't hear the voice directly, they were filled with doubt, but they followed him because they could feel something in him, that calm certainty, that settled presence, and that's something you can't fake. People can smell fear, but they can also feel faith. When someone truly believes, it radiates, it becomes contagious, so even in their fear, they followed, even in their panic, they moved forward, and every step they took through that path was a step into the unknown. On both sides, walls of water higher than buildings, held back by nothing but divine command. That kind of scene breaks your sense of what's real. That kind of moment redefines what's possible, because this wasn't just about escape. It wasn't just about survival. This was about being witnessed, about proving that there's a force in this world that sides with justice, that when the time is right, even nature will step in, even oceans will shift. That when tyranny pushes too far, something bigger answers, and it doesn't whisper. It roars. There's something haunting about imagining that scene. The sound of thousands of feet hitting dry seabed, echoing between two walls of water. Children clinging to their mothers, elders gripping walking sticks, young men looking back over their shoulders, still hearing the distant thunder of hooves growing louder. You can feel the tension rising with every step. The air thick with the smell of salt and fear. A strange wind tearing through the passage like the breath of something not from this world. They weren't just crossing a body of water. They were walking through a moment that would divide history. A moment that no one would ever be able to explain, but no one could deny. What's even more mind-blowing is that the very force designed to protect them became the very thing that destroyed their enemy. That path wasn't just their rescue, it was Pharaoh's trap. The same road that opened for the weak collapsed on the powerful. That's the kind of divine reversal that makes you sit in silence, because in our world we're so used to strength winning. We're used to the one with the army, the weapons, the control, getting what they want. But in that moment, everything flipped. The ones who had nothing but faith walked out alive, and the ones who had everything but truth didn't make it. And think about Pharaoh. He had seen signs before this. He had watched plague after plague tear through his land, water turned to blood, frogs, locusts, darkness that wrapped around the bones. And still he chased. Still he believed he could overpower a prophet protected by something far greater than any kingdom. That kind of arrogance doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from delusion. It comes from worshipping your own power for so long that you forget you're just flesh, that you bleed like everyone else, that no throne is high enough to be safe from justice when it finally comes knocking. Injustice did come, not quietly, not slowly, but like a tidal wave that had been held back just long enough to let the innocent pass. You have to wonder what Pharaoh was thinking when he rode into that parted sea. Did he think it was a trick? Did he believe it was his destiny to crush them there? Or was there a flicker of doubt in his chest? A whisper in the back of his mind that said this is where it ends, because sometimes the most terrifying judgment is the one that feels like opportunity right before it strikes. That's the kind of irony that only divine power can write. And what about the people who crossed? They weren't warriors, they weren't trained, they weren't armed, they were slaves just days earlier. They had nothing but a promise and a man who told them to keep walking. That's the level of obedience that bends reality, not because they had proof, not because the path made sense, but because something inside told them go. That's what real faith looks like, not certainty. But movement even when your legs are shaking and your heart is screaming that it's over. And through it all, the prophet didn't take credit. He didn't claim he split the sea. He knew who did it. He was just the vessel, just the voice, just the one who stood in the gap while others panicked, and that's what set him apart, not ego, not fame, but complete submission to something far greater than himself. That's the kind of leader people will follow into the impossible, because when a leader bows to truth, the world around him bends to follow. It's almost too massive to picture. A sea doesn't just split. Water doesn't suddenly rise like walls and freeze in place. It doesn't leave behind clean, dry ground as if it had never been there, but it did. In that moment, the impossible became real, not through science, not through machinery, not through human invention, but through obedience to divine will. And that raises a question most people don't ask. What kind of connection must a person have with the Creator for something like that to respond to them? What kind of purity, what kind of discipline, what kind of truth must exist in someone's heart for the elements of the earth to follow their lead? Because this wasn't just a random burst of power, this was precision. This was timing, this was a message to every arrogant empire that thought their grip on the world was permanent. The sea didn't part when the people started running. It didn't split while they were making plans. It split when the prophet, carrying a lifetime of mission and burden, raised his staff in faith. That's the kind of moment that changes everything, the kind of moment where the universe seems to pause and watch. Because it wasn't just about saving a group of people, it was about proving something on a much larger scale. That truth isn't weak, that justice isn't blind, that power doesn't always look like armor and swords. It looks like one man standing still while the world collapses around him. And even in that moment of supernatural awe, the fear didn't vanish from the people. They weren't suddenly brave just because the water moved. They still hesitated. Some were probably frozen in place, overwhelmed by the sight of it. You have to remember, they weren't used to miracles. They had spent years under chains, watching their prayers go unanswered, being told they were nothing. Suddenly, this massive, unimaginable sign appears, and they are expected to believe without doubt, without hesitation. But even the doubt didn't stop them. They stepped forward anyway. That's the detail that most people miss. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's walking anyway. It's trembling but moving forward because something in you knows there's no going back. Behind them, a storm of violence. Ahead of them, a path that shouldn't exist. Above them, walls of water that could collapse at any moment. Yet they walked. Every footstep was an act of defiance against the fear that had ruled them for generations. Every step was a declaration that the era of oppression was coming to an end. And with every breath they were shedding the identity forced on them. Slaves no more, victims no more. They were being transformed by the miracle they were walking through. And the prophet, he wasn't walking in fear, but he wasn't celebrating either. He wasn't screaming with excitement. He was calm, measured, present, because he knew this wasn't about him. He wasn't the center of the story. He was just the messenger, the bridge, the one sent to lead. That kind of humility is rare. Most people, if given the ability to command nature, would let it get to their heads, but he didn't. He didn't see power as something to show off. He saw it as a trust, a responsibility, a test, and the real test wasn't just the sea. It was what came after, because surviving the miracle is one thing. Living like you understood what it meant is another. Anyone can be amazed in the moment. Anyone can cry when they see a wonder. But the question is, does it change you? Do you carry that miracle with you? Or do you forget the second life gets hard again? Because the people who walked through the sea, they weren't just saved. They were given a second chance to become something new, something worthy of the miracle they had just lived through. So the next time you hear someone call it a myth, pause. The next time someone says it's just a story, just a symbol, remember what really happened. A sea split, a people rose, a tyrant fell, and a man of unshakable faith walked forward. Not to impress the world, but to obey the one who controls it. Because sometimes the most unbelievable moments in history aren't the ones we made up. They're the ones we forgot how to believe in.